Hey, it's me, Nalthazar, and welcome to another Magic the Gathering Puzzle Quest video. In today's video, I'm going to be going over a brand new mono-green Planeswalker that has entered the vault, Wrenn and Seven. So, let's get into it. To kick this off, I want to give an extra huge shout out and thank you to my patrons, as it is thanks to them that I'm able to make this video for you guys. So I was able to buy this by and large because my patrons have been so incredibly amazing and supportive that I will be able to pick up a few of these to make videos for you guys with this set. Now, Wrenn and Seven is a brand new mono green Planeswalker. If you pick up the bundle itself right now, as it is in the vault, you will get Wrenn. If you are a VIP, you'll get a bonus 30 mana jewels to go along with the usual 40 mana crystals, 20,000 mana runes, 120 mana jewels, and 3 green booster packs. Wrenn and Seven themselves are a mono green planeswalker with the following abilities: One with Nature, Hosting Gems, and Overflowing. They also happen to have a passive ability, a harmony ability, that makes it so that the first time you convert gems on your turn, you're going to convert 2 additional gems to green. The first ability, One with Nature, is going to cost you 9 loyalty and has you pick up to 4 of the first 4 cards from your library, fetch those cards, then destroy the top 4 cards from your library. Furthermore, land cards in your hand gain half of their mana. Now, part of what's really cool about this first ability, One with Nature, is that in being able to pick up to 4 of the first 4 cards, that means that if there's a card amongst those 4 that you would like to be in the graveyard, for reasons of maybe you're just going to reanimate it, or maybe you're going to do something to give mana to cards in your graveyard, or whatever that might be, you can select which cards are going to your hand, and then which cards are going to the graveyard. If you decide to select and take all 4 of them directly to your hand, then just the next 4 cards in your library will go to the graveyard. Beyond that, you also wind up giving the lands in your hand half of their mana. This ability is absolutely as good as advertised. A 9 loyalty ability to draw 4, mill 4, and then give half mana to all the lands in your hand is an absolutely stupendous ability. The second ability, Hosting Gems, is going to cost you 15 loyalty. It has target creature you control gets +X+X. X is equal to the amount of green gems on the board up to 10. Then Coven, if you have 2 creatures with different powers on the battlefield, convert 2 gems to green. I honestly haven't found too many uses for this second ability. I did wind up using it in a Pauper build so that I could give a creature that had Berserker more toughness and more power so that it could stay on the battlefield, whapping away my opponent's creatures and hitting them for a little bit longer. But other than that, I really didn't have any real use for using that ability, as I would have been better off using One with Nature, let's face it, like just about 2 times. So the third and final ability is Overflowing. And with that one, you're going to create an Overflowing token, and then you pick up to 2 of the first 4 non-land cards in your graveyard, fetch those cards, and give them full mana. No, it doesn't do full _mana _gain _multiple _description. So you're going to give 2 of those cards full mana. The mana bonuses for Wrenn and Seven are going to be +4 to green, 3 to red, 2 to blue, 1 to black, and then -1 to blue. Part of what makes Wrenn a really cool planeswalker is that there are a number of ways in which you can try and build around Wrenn and Seven. The obvious way to try and build around Wrenn is to build some sort of graveyard deck, because the first ability is going to mill cards, and then the third ability is going to bring cards back. And fortunately for us, in the current set, there happen to be a lot of cards that have the buried mechanic that are green. There are a lot of cards, furthermore, that have the graveyard mechanic that are green. There are some that really stood out to me, though, and so I'm going to point some of those out. However, there are many different cards that you can use here in a deck with Wrenn and Seven and find that you will be very effective. Storm the Festival is a surprisingly good card in conjunction with Wrenn. This one has pick up to the first 4 different cards from your library, fetch those cards, and then cards in your hand with base cost 15 or less gain half their mana rounded up. Now, if you wind up having 2 of these charged up in your graveyard, or 1 charged up in your hand and 1 charged up in your graveyard, then they actually are going to give all the cards in your hand full mana, because one will give half and the other will give half, and 1 half plus 1 half is 1 whole. So that gives us a handful of mana with Storm the Festival, which is actually very nice. Diregraph Rebirth is a phenomenal card to use with Wrenn and Seven, because Wrenn's first ability is going to be dumping cards in the graveyard. Diregraph Rebirth might be one of those cards that gets dumped into the graveyard, but it happens to have Flashback and Buried, so it's a card that's going to be able to be cast back from your graveyard. Furthermore, if you cast it from your hand, you get to pick one of the first 4 creatures from your graveyard and put it into play. This gives green an access to reanimation, which is very, very good. Beyond that, we've got Turn the Earth, which I found was much better than I originally gave it credit for. This card is very good in a flashback deck with Wrenn and Seven. You're going to get so many different cards in your graveyard that it's going to be a free 15 mana for using this card, and you'll find that you can get some pretty crazy loops going just by having Turn the Earth in your deck. It's not a card that I would use outside of a flashback type of deck, but definitely is useful. Rise of the Ants came as a massive surprise to me, because the new insect tokens in the set are actually 3/3 insects, meaning that this is 10 mana for a 6/6 and gain 4 life card that has flashback. So it has the opportunity to come back from your graveyard, be cast again, and give you 2 more 3/3 insect tokens. I found this to be a surprisingly good card, definitely worth using if you don't have some of the bigger, beefier cards. If you are planning to try and play Wrenn with a graveyard build, then I would definitely suggest using Rise of the Ants as one of your cards, because it is actually a very decent card that happens to have flashback. We also have Ghoulcaller's Harvest, which is going to make Decayed Zombie tokens. Unfortunately, I haven't found that this one makes quite as many Decayed Zombie tokens as I would like for it to make. I found that the Rise of the Ants was better than the Ghoulcaller's Harvest, but with that said, there were still definitely some games where I was very appreciative for using that card. The final card that I want to draw your attention to that has flashback that can be pretty fun with Wrenn is this Winterthorn Blessing. This one's going to give your first creature a permanent +1/+1 buff, but then it's going to disable target opposing creature until the beginning of your next turn. On its own, this would not be a good card, but just with the way that you can wind up chaining things with Wrenn, it winds up actually being a good card. Now, on a slightly separate note, Wrenn is actually amazing with the Vanguards that exist for Wrenn. We got 2 Vanguards in the set, Wrenn and 6 and Wrenn and 7. And if you're able to get both of them, you definitely want to put both of them into pretty much any Wrenn and 7 deck that you make. Wrenn and 6 has a +1 that converts X gems to your Planeswalker colors, where X is the number of non-creature cards in your graveyard. If you are continually spamming your first ability with Wrenn and 7, you are going to find that your graveyard is going to grow exponentially. You will find that this ability is going to wind up giving you 10, 20, 30 gems triggered at every time that you use that +1. So you're just going to get so much mana off of using this +1 that it ultimately winds up being incredibly silly. Beyond that, you also get the passive ability from Wrenn and 7 for when you convert gems for the first time. So it's going to wind up being convert X gems to your Planeswalker colors, where X is the number of non-creature cards in your graveyard +2, unless you're running other gem conversion, which is always a good idea. The Wrenn and 7 Vanguard has a +2 that's going to destroy the top 2 cards of your library. And this is part of why I say if you're able to play with both Wrens in your deck, you play with both Wrens in your deck like every single time with this Planeswalker. Because Wrenn and 7 is going to be destroying cards from your library every turn, whereas Wrenn and 6 is going to be converting gems based on the number of non-creature cards in your graveyard. So Wrenn and 7's ability is going to be stacking your graveyard, and then Wrenn and 6 is going to be able to take all those cards that you're throwing into the graveyard to give your hand extra mana. And if that wasn't enough, the -8 on Wrenn and 7 is going to pick up to 4 of the first 4 different cards from your graveyard, fetch them, and give them all full mana. So not only are you going to be able to use Wrenn and 7 as a battery to just throw things into your graveyard for a few turns, but then you're going to be able to use the -8 and just get 4 free cards from your graveyard and then cast them. The 2 of these together with the Wrenn and 7 Planeswalker are absolutely nasty and 100% worth targeting. I would say that the Wrenn and 7 Vanguard is the best of the Mythic Vanguards from the set, and the Wrenn and 6 Vanguard is the second best of the rares. Surprisingly, there are Vanguards in this set that are worth targeting. I'm going to be making a separate video about that entirely, but if you are able to get your hands on the Wrens, I would definitely go ahead and do so. Beyond the Wrens themselves, other cards that really stand out in the current standard that you can use with Wrenn and 7 are going to be cards that interact with your graveyard in some way, or cards that convert gems. If you have something that's able to do both, then that's definitely an added bonus. Ancient Green Warden happens to be one of those cards. Your first ability with Wrenn and 7 is going to be throwing things into your graveyard, and Ancient Green Warden reads, at the beginning of combat on your turn, return the first land support from your graveyard to the board under your control. So the first ability for Wrenn is likely going to be throwing a land in your graveyard. At the very least, if you see that one is coming up and you have access to a Green Warden, you can just purposefully see that that land goes into your graveyard so the Ancient Green Warden is able to bring it back. Beyond that, Ancient Green Warden has, when a land support enters the board under your control, convert 6 gems to your Planeswalker's colors. This can trigger 3 times per turn. So that means that when the Green Warden brings the land back to the battlefield, it's immediately going to convert 6 gems to green. If you haven't already converted gems that turn, it's going to convert 6 plus 2 for 8 because of Wrenn's passive ability. You wind up not only getting a huge mana boost from the conversion here, but then every turn thereafter you wind up getting absolutely insane mana boosts because of the Green Warden. Beyond that, we finally have an actually amazing use for Harness Infinity. I know that there are some gimmicky decks that you could make with this card in the past, but this is actually amazing. Like it's really, really good. It's not just decent, it's really good. So this is a 16 mana spell that says each of the first 6 different cards without buried in your graveyard get buried X. X is that card's base mana cost, right? So the 6 different cards without buried in your graveyard, get it. Then you discard your hand, and for each card discarded this way, each card with buried in your graveyard gains 3 mana. So if you wind up making a deck that's running a whole bunch of cards that do have buried, and then a few specific targeted cards that don't have buried, then the casting of Harness Infinity is going to specifically give those cards that don't have buried, and then you're going to be able to cast them all for having used Harness Infinity because it's going to fill up your whole graveyard with mana. So it winds up doing some pretty crazy things in conjunction with Wrenn and 7's first ability. I would really like to use the Consuming Blob with Wrenn, but unfortunately the token is bugged right now. And so the ability that the token gets when it enters the battlefield to get plus X, where X is the number of cards in your graveyard, it just winds up making it so it's whatever the summative total is. So let's say that you have 10 cards in your graveyard and you get a Consuming Blob down, and then the Necrophage Ooze comes down. The Necrophage Ooze comes down and gets the plus 10 buff. Well, let's say that then you wind up casting a spell, so you have 11 cards in your graveyard. The next turn, you get another token of the blob. The blob only winds up getting +1/+1 because it will only have gotten a +11 buff for there being 11 cards in your graveyard. When Consuming Blob is ultimately fixed and works as it reads, assuming that is how it's going to turn out, then this is going to be another amazing card to pair with Wrenn and 7. Now, as for that, I want to go ahead and show you guys my favorite land to actually pair with Wrenn and 7. And I know there's so many different cards that convert green, so you're able to convert green really easily. For that matter, if we just select supports, we have ourselves the Skemfar Elderhall, which is a 12 mana common from Kaldheim. We have ourselves Nissa's Pilgrimage, which all of a sudden becomes a 3 mana to convert 4 to green, which is amazing. We have Lair of the Hydra, which is going to do absolutely dirty things in a deck using Wrenn and 7, given how much conversion you're able to get. And then my favorite of all of them happens to be the World Tree. The World Tree is particularly wacky with Wrenn and 7 because this winds up converting 3 gems to green, then 2 gems to green for Wrenn and 7's Harmony, then another 2 gems to green for the Planeswalker colors. The World Tree happens to be another card that's bugged. It doesn't matter if you control 3 or more land supports, it's going to convert the extra 2 gems to your Planeswalker color anyways. So having the World Tree down is just a guaranteed convert 7 gems to green for having this one land. It's absolutely ridiculous and nutty. Unfortunately, Wrenn and 7 has a -1 to blue, so you unfortunately don't really want to be running Arixmethys Slumbering Isle with Wrenn. However, if you wanted to, because it does convert 4 to green as well as 4 to blue, you could go ahead and do that and get away with it. Now, I'm going to go ahead and showcase two of the decks that I wound up building for this particular video. The first of them is a graveyard deck, and this is the graveyard deck that I'll be playing in the video. So this deck is a ton of fun. So if you take a look at the cards that do have buried in the deck, the cards that do have buried are Vengevine, Storm the Festival, Rise of the Ants, Turn the Earth, and Ghoul Caller's Harvest. Meaning that Harness Infinity is going to be able to make it so that we are able to bring back free Wrenn and Sixes, free Wrenn and Sevens, free Gather the Packs, and free Great Auroras, along with other free Harness the Infinity, or Harness Infinity if they are in our graveyard. Now this deck is particularly potent because of Vengevine. So if you're unfamiliar with how Vengevine works, Vengevine is a 12 mana creature. It has buried, and when you cast a creature, if this card is in your graveyard, it gains 6 mana. It also happens to have prowess, so when you cast a non-creature card, this creature gets a permanent +2/+2 buff. Now, when you actually cast a card from your graveyard, that counts as casting. So every Vengevine that you wind up bringing back from your graveyard is going to cast another Vengevine. Now, what's really nutty about this is once you get this going, Harness Infinity is going to make it so that Gather the Pack, which is one of the few cards that happens to not have buried in this deck, is going to be cast repeatedly. And when this card gets cast repeatedly, every single time that you cast this, you're going to throw 4 more Vengevines in your graveyard, because this particular deck has Vengevine as the only creature. So that means that you're going to wind up getting an easy 10, 20, 30 Vengevines in the graveyard, and then once 2 of them come into play, all the rest of them are just going to start coming into play for free, because 2 of them coming into play is going to give 12 mana to all the Vengevines in your graveyard, and then all the Vengevines are going to come on back. Now for the other creature slots, I am running Rise of the Ants, which as I mentioned is quite solid, and I'm also running Ghoul Caller's Harvest. I was hoping that I would be able to get a lot more Vengevines in the graveyard before the Ghoul Caller's Harvest would make tokens, but the Vengevines just come back so easily between Harness the Infinity and then the Vengevines coming down themselves that I found that I really didn't get as many zombie tokens as I wanted. The other deck that I'll be running in this video that I thought was pretty cool was this one right here. And once again, you're going to see that both of them are running both of the Wrenn Vanguards, because the Wrenn Vanguards are almost like must includes if you have them for Wrenn and Seven. I'm also running the World Tree in this one like I was in the other one, just because the World Tree is just so good with it. And so I'm also running Vengevine in this one because once again, Vengevine is really good with Wrenn. But the idea behind this particular deck was to try and use the Ancient Green Warden along with Sigarda, Host of Herons. So I've gone over the Green Warden, but the one other piece of the Green Warden that's important to note is that it has Vigilance. And Sigarda, Host of Herons has, while on the battlefield, your other creatures gain prevent damage, and when a creature you control blocks, becomes blocked, or when your opponent casts a spell, convert 5 gems to loyalty. So when I was first playing with Wrenn, this actually was the very first deck that I played with Wrenn, and I wound up running it this way because the 21 loyalty for Wrenn's Overflowing ability is very excessive, and I thought it would be really hard to use that ability repeatedly. And then I thought, well, you know, Sigarda is going to convert so many gems to loyalty with the Ancient Green Warden blocking and with my opponent playing spells that I should be able to use that ability fairly reliably. And that was definitely true. However, I also found that it didn't matter because between the combination of Wrenn and 6 and 7's Vanguards, along with the World Tree converting the gems that it does, you're able to get loyalty out the rear anyways, and you're able to cast an incredible amount of stuff. The final match that you are going to see in this is a Pauper deck, and so you'll wind up seeing gameplay of that. If you don't have these decks, because I understand they are fairly Mythic and Masterpiece heavy, you can just start to grow the Planeswalker along with your collection as you get more of these cards that happen to have the buried mechanic, and then try and use your mana jewels to target the Vanguards, and then with those you'll be able to do some pretty nutty things with this Planeswalker. So let's go ahead and get into the gameplay. So this first match is actually going to be the Pauper match, and you'll see that I tried to load it up with as much removal along with the pretty nasty mono green fractal cards. The mono green fractal cards just happen to make mono green such an incredibly terrifying color for Pauper that I just sort of had to throw them in. So I wind up getting a pretty lucky set of matches, and then Tamio winds up doing completely goof and does not take the 5 match in blue, which is one of her colors, which was definitely very confusing at the moment. So here what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to try and play the Binding of the Old Gods and get rid of my opponent's creature. It's really nice to have that Binding of the Old Gods, that saga, because not only does it kill the opponent's creature, but it's also then going to give me a land. And so you'll see here that it gets me the Skemfar land that's going to, I think it's called the Skemfar land, but it's the Kaldheim common that's going to convert 2. And you'll wind up seeing very quickly that it's going to convert a heck of a lot more than 2. So here I'm using my first ability, and I'm deciding if I want the Bookworm or not. I decide to throw the Bookworm in the graveyard to be the first creature in my graveyard in case I'm able to bring it back with my Reanimator spell. So here I've got 1 gem converter down already, so I want to go ahead and get Nissa's Pilgrimage and then ultimately the Druid class down, just because the more gem conversion you have down, the better. My opponent seems to have somewhat scary spell deck, but that won't ultimately be too big of a problem. So here, there's just so many green gems on the battlefield that I'm thinking, you know what? There's enough green gems on the battlefield that if I just make, say, a white match here, then I'll be able to get the fractal tokens down and have them with a really high level, so that when I do ultimately get my first creature down, my first creature is just going to be an absolute banger. So I happen to have the Berserker creature in my hand, and that's absolutely the creature that I want to be getting the bonus from the fractal. So I'm actually going to go ahead and swap my Bookworm up ahead of my Burly Breaker, even though I actually do really like the Burly Breaker. The Burly Breaker is that 12 mana werewolf that you see in my hand, but when the Burly Breaker transforms, it becomes, I think, an 8/7 at night, which makes it like very, very, very terrifying for a 12 mana. 12 mana for an 8/7 is able to put in a lot of work. So here, unfortunately, Tamiyo did disable the Druid class in my hand, but I mean, it's not the end of the world. And you'll see that little flash for a moment right there where my Bookworm gets +29/+29 because of the ley lines right there. So I'm going to move up another Druid class. I'm definitely going to play the one that I have in my hand. I'm going to take the green into Loyalty because green and Loyalty is our friend. I'm going to get my Werewolf down, and my Worm is definitely going to go ahead and kill Tamiyo's Art token. So at this stage, Tamiyo's one real hope to win is actually to destroy my Fractal, because with Tamiyo destroying the Fractal, without her destroying the Fractal, I should say, then my creatures are going to be able to just run rampant on her. So I'm going to take the 5 match with the Druid class just to convert some more gems and get a 5 match, because 5 matches are our friend. You'll see that my Werewolf it's nighttime, so my Werewolf's at an 8/7. I'm able to Diregraph Rebirth that Bookworm that I threw in the graveyard at the beginning of the game. And so now my Worm is able to swing in for 43, which is very significant. I mean, being able to swing in for that much damage is pretty scary. So Tamiyo destroys my land, which is what makes those 2 elf tokens. I'm getting some of my gem conversion here. I definitely have 2 creatures with different powers. And so at this stage, I was just thinking to myself, you know what? I might as well just use the second ability to use the second ability. I wouldn't otherwise really suggest using the second ability very much, but I figured why not? You know what? I'm recording. I might as well use the second ability. So I'm going to use Hosting Gems on my Berserker just to see how big I can get it. So you'll see that it gets that +10 buff right there. That's a permanent +10/+10 buff. The green gem conversion did not wind up really doing anything for me. So since there are so many green gems, I am going to go for the mana field there on the Druid class. And it works out perfectly because it gives me another one of my worms. And then I'm going to smack Tamiyo for 60 and she's done. So very effective for a pauper deck. This second match is my green warden deck, and you'll see that I have just an absolutely optimal set of starting matches here. I've got a 5 match right there, and I've got another 5 match right there. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough mana for me to get my Wrenn and Seven Vanguard down turn 1, but I mean, I really can't complain about getting 2 5 matches, so that was pretty nice. Now, you'll see that here I'm able to start spamming that first ability very early on, and I just want to try and get as many cards in my graveyard as I can so that I'm able to start pulling things out of the graveyard. Furthermore, I'm trying to go for Loyalty along with preventing my opponent from getting any kind of real mana. I do not want Ashiok to be getting any kind of really good mana. So I'm going to use my +2 again, and I'm going to throw away that 1 card in my hand just so that I can try and draw 4. Now here, you'll see that I actually chose not to bring the Lair of the Hydra into my hand, and that was because I had the Green Warden. So I know that if the Green Warden comes down, that I'm going to freely be able to get the layer of the Hydra and bring it back into my hand. Now, another thing that I could have done is I could have actually just let almost all of those just go straight to my graveyard, because my Vanguard is at 9 shields. So I could use the -8 here and then bring all 4 of those cards back to my hand, which could have arguably been a better choice in that particular moment. But nonetheless, I'm just going to go ahead and continue pumping things into my graveyard. So here I'm deciding not to activate it immediately because I obviously have a handful of cards, and so I don't want to do that. I'm actually checking my graveyard, and I'm like, oh yeah, there's a lot of really good stuff in my graveyard. I definitely want those cards. I'd very much like to get Wrenn and 6 into my hand, so I'm going to use Wrenn and 7's third ability. I'm going to go ahead and take Wrenn and 6, Vengevine, the Gather the Pack, and my land, the Layer of the Hydra back. So you'll see right there that you just get so much tempo out of having the Vanguards, because they just do so much for you. And once Wrenn and 6 comes down, you'll see just how the mana conversion is going to work out for us. So I play the Gather the Pack. That's going to throw more cards in my graveyard. Hopefully that threw more Vengevines than anything else, because we'd like to be able to go ahead and get more of those back. I'm going to activate Wrenn and 7's ability first, just because I know that Wrenn and 6 is about to convert a whole bunch of gems to green, and I do not want the green to destroy my Wrenn and 7 since it was only at 1 shield. So here I've got some pretty great match options. I'm definitely going to take the green and black match right there, because I want to try and take away as many black options from Ashiok as possible. You'll see that I get some extra Vengevine casts from the graveyard, which is nice. And then the land coming back from the graveyard to play is going to convert even more gems from the Green Warden. And so now at this stage, I'm just rolling in it. It's absolutely ridiculous how much mana you can produce with this Planeswalker, because with all the different cards that you have at your disposal and all the cards that you're throwing into your graveyard and all the mana you're going to get from your +1, you're just able to produce a whole hand's worth of mana every single turn. It's absolutely ridiculous. So I'm gonna throw that 1 card away just so that I can activate my third ability and get 2 free cards back from my graveyard. And so for the 2 free cards, I'm gonna go ahead and take Sigarda and the Diregraph Rebirth, because the Diregraph Rebirth is going to represent yet another free creature for me, and I like getting free creatures back. So I have a handful of mana. I don't need to make a green match. I'm gonna go ahead and take a black match, so that Ashiok is less able to cast bad stuff from their hand. I'm going to get 2 more Wrens down, and then I'm going to go ahead and select a Green Warden here with the Diregraph Rebirth, just because those have more power to them. So I'm going to get a World Tree back from the graveyard. The Green Warden and the Vengevine are going to swing at Ashiok. And unless Ashiok plays Ruinous Ulta, oh right, it doesn't have it anymore. But no, really. So there you're going to see Sigarda converting a whole bunch of gems to loyalty. And then it's already got me back at my third ability. So I used my third ability last turn, and I'm already at my third ability this turn, and it wasn't even my turn to convert gems. And that's a 21 loyalty ability. So just further evidence as to just how ridiculous this Planeswalker actually is. So I'm going to use the -8 here on the Wrenn and 7 Vanguard to get all 4 of those back. And then I'm going to go ahead and check what my opponent has. I'm gonna play the Gather the Pack before I play the Sigarda. No, after. Okay, I'm gonna use my third ability here though, Overflowing, to get 2 more free cards from my graveyard, because why not? So I'll take the Diregraph Rebirth, and then I might as well take another Wrenn and 7 just because I keep using the minus ability for that one. And then I'm going to take the 5 match here. I'm going to play my Sigarda, a Wrenn and 6, and you'll notice that I didn't use the Wrenn and 6 ability just yet. I'm going to play the Wrenn and 7. I'm going to play Gather the Pack, and then I'm going to get to pick one of the cards from my graveyard. I'm going to take another Green Warden because that's the most power. And then this is where I'm actually going to use the plus ability on Wrenn and 6. So hopefully I can actually get enough mana to cast both of the cards in my hand, so that I can give an extra 6 mana to all the Vengevines in my graveyard, which I am indeed able to do. So I'm able to cast another Green Warden, another Vengevine, and now all the other Vengevines that are in my graveyard are going to cast, and I'm going to kill Ashiok. So that was really, really smooth match, and I've honestly just found that pretty much all of my matches with Wrenn are this smooth. And look at that, I'm already at my third ability again. It's absolutely nutty. It's ridiculous. So that's the end of Ashiok. This final match is my graveyard deck, and it is definitely my Wrenn and Seven baby. So it's absolutely beautiful. Now I have my Storm the Festival here, and I just so happen to have about the craziest starting match that I can get. So I'm going to be able to use a turn 1 Storm the Festival to get a Wrenn and Seven, a Great Aurora, and a Vengevine. So the Great Aurora is just in case Liliana does something terrible, and then the Vengevine, you know, is my creature, so I want it. But most importantly is the Wrenn and Seven Vanguard here. So I'm going to go ahead and throw away the second Great Aurora there. I definitely don't need to have multiple copies of it. I would like to be able to potentially use my first ability to try and fetch some cards and throw some things into the graveyard. So here I want the Harness Infinity for sure, and I might as well take the Wrenn and Seven Vanguard as well. So the other two cards both have flashback. So with both of them going into the graveyard, that's going to give my graveyard a little bit more mana. So I'm definitely okay with that. I'm going to play the Wrenn and Seven Vanguard here, and then that gets me pretty well set up for the rest of the match. Now I'm going to go ahead and check the -3 here, but converting 2 gems to green just isn't going to be worth it. So I might as well just keep loading up my graveyard here, and then hopefully I'll be able to I'll hopefully be able to get my Harness Infinity down soon. So I've got a pretty nice match here, and then that turns into a 5 match, which turns into Harness the Infinity, or I always say I don't know why, Harness Infinity. So that's going to actually enable me to cast my Storm the Festival from the graveyard. And so here I actually make a little bit of a mistake. I do take Harness Infinity, which is fantastic. I definitely want that from my graveyard. But I also take the Great Aurora there, and I definitely don't need that Great Aurora there. So another Rise of the Ants is going to cast. I've got another Storm the Festival that is casting for free. And so here you're going to see that it fills the rest of my hand with mana here. So I'm going to use Turn the Earth, and that's going to give me a whole bunch of stuff in my graveyard. And then I've got another Harness Infinity in my hand. So I'm going to go ahead and use that. I'm just going to go ahead and discard my hand. And then that's going to enable me to get even more mana to the stuff in my graveyard. That's going to bring back a Wrenn and 6 Vanguard. You'll notice that my computer's having a bit of a hard time. As I said, my screen mirror for my PC stopped working. I've been trying to talk with the support of the company that makes it, but they haven't been able to help me find a fix for it yet. So the whole iPhone to PC is just not friendly. But nonetheless, you'll see just how much I'm getting back from my Harness Infinity here. I've already used my abilities with Wrenn, so I can't use the Vanguard again. I can, however, use my first ability here. So I'm going to go ahead and take the Wrenn and 6, and I'm just going to let the other things go to the graveyard. I made a few misplays this match. One of them was that I definitely should have just taken all of those things to my hand, just to make it so that they weren't necessarily in the graveyard, so I'd have more in my hand, but I did not do that. So I'm not going to attack with the Decayed Zombies here. I don't need to attack with the Decayed Zombies here, and so at this stage, I just want to try and get myself some Gather the Packs. And I'm very fortunate. My first ability is going to give me a few Gather the Packs here. I'm going to use the Wrenn and 6 here in just a moment. I'm going to go ahead and just gather the pack and just dump as many Vengevines into the graveyard as I can. So this here is actually going to dump 8 Vengevines into my graveyard, which is pretty solid. So I'm going to dump the 8 Vengevines in my graveyard. I might as well just dump 2 more cards into my graveyard with the +2 from my other for my Wrenn and 7. It's not looking like I've got a 5 match here, and I might as well save it for something a little bit better. I could alternatively just throw away everything and then just use the -8, which is exactly what's going to happen. You'll see that I'm able to pick a Harness Infinity back, which is just insane here. So now the best play here, right? The very best play would have been to use Turn the Earth twice and then both Gather the Packs, because then the Gather the Packs would have put 4 Vengevines in my hand, and I would have just had a whole bunch of Vengevines in my hand, which would have been kind of perfect. But alas, I didn't have my big kid pants on, so that's definitely not what happened there. So I'm going to gather the pack. That's going to get me 2 Vengevines. I'm going to gather the pack. That's going to get me another Vengevine. You're going to see Turn the Earths come in, and that's going to just give a whole bunch of mana to my graveyard. I'm going to Harness Infinity, which is going to throw away those 3 Vengevines from my hand. And then here I'm able to start just playing things all willy-nilly from my deck. So I'm going to take the Harness Infinity, the Wrenn and 6, and the Gather the Pack. They're all going to gain half of their mana. The Wrenn and 6 we're just going to let come back from the graveyard from the Harness Infinity. The Ghoulcrawler's Harvest we're going to let come down. And this is going to tell us how many Vengevines we've got. So that's 4, 5, 6. So that means I've got at least 12 Vengevines in my graveyard. The Gather the Pack means that that's going to dump 4 more of them in there for me. That's going to be 16 Vengevines in the graveyard. And so now we're just going to let those 16 Vengevines come back from the graveyard. And that's definitely going to be the end of Liliana. She's just going to get completely flattened here. So I know, once again, that the video is sort of stuttering a bit. My laptop just really is struggling to handle the game here. But as much as my laptop is struggling to handle the game, Liliana is going to be struggling to handle all of these Vengevines, which are definitely going to come in like a wrecking ball. So I'm going to let the Decayed Zombies attack here, even though I don't need them to. And that's going to be the end of Liliana. In conclusion, I would strongly recommend that you pick up Wrenn and 7, either from the vault right now for cash, or just wait until Wrenn and 7 comes into the vault for crystals. Wrenn and 7 is only going to cost you 295 crystals, but there are enough green cards that interact with the graveyard right now in Standard, and then with the addition of all of the other new green cards that interact with the graveyard from the Innistrad Midnight Hunt set, you're going to have at least a year of cards that are going to pair very well with Wrenn and 7 and be very fun to use in conjunction with this Walker. This Walker is definitely, at minimum, an A-tier Planeswalker. He could very well be an S-tier Planeswalker. I would need to test a little bit more to see if I think that Wrenn and 7 has the same level of power as Nissa Worldwaker and Garruk, but I would have to say that from my early impressions, the answer is definitely yes. Between the first ability, which is drawing you as many cards as it does, and the passive, this Planeswalker is just able to ramp you up so quickly and play so many cards that pretty much, regardless of what it is you're trying to play, you're going to be able to do something nasty just because you're going to be able to play so many cards. So I hope that this video was entertaining and helpful for you. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.